what I find is that many of these women are, they're killing it in all, when we talk about most ways that we measure success, they have the accolades, they're, in a career, or they're, in a career that they love, or doing very well in the career that they've chosen, or the career path that they've chosen. But where they do struggle is in their personal relationships. And I was reading a stat the other day, and this is maybe a little bit of an extension of that, where women are so focused now on our careers, which is a great thing. It's a great thing to have women in the workforce and contributing. And then what often happens is we start to think about families or our relationships maybe later on in life. And for some women, and I have friends of mine who have struggled with this, when they decide that they want to have children, let's say, their biology and their timelines don't often meet up. And so we have, and maybe this is a slight deviation, but we have a lot of IVF, and we have a lot of trouble with a lot of these women conceiving. And I read a stat the other day that said 80% of women who are childless have not done so by choice. And so certainly I have friends and individuals who are childless by choice, and that's fine. And we support and we love all, everyone's life decisions. But it becomes a sadder reality when you have these women who are, as I mentioned, like in all measures of success, doing very, very well, and then really struggle to find, when they are starting to think about childbearing, they're not in the relationship that they feel is a safe one, or they feel is the right one, or maybe they're not in a relationship at all. So I thought we might start to explore this through the lens of your work, in terms of our childhood upbringing. And I know we'll get to our conditioned selves, and even how we choose mates and why we choose the mates that we choose. But maybe we can start off, I know that's a long preamble, but maybe we can start off with our childhood upbringing and how that can shape, particularly that overachiever archetype. Like, what are some of the common through lines that you see, or you used to see in clinical practice, that you still see now through your healer circle and your community that you lead?
I'm over here shaking my head throughout your whole preamble here, Stephanie, because there's so much that you're sharing in terms of being an overachiever, and right, this kind of aspect of who I've hung my identity on for so much of my life. And then what happens when that's not fulfilling anymore? Or what happens when we do discover, right, that other choices are in alignment with us, like having families or relationships, or what have you. And when we're not then functioning as we're used to, knowing ourselves, right? I'm an achievement driven person. I'm used to doing things right, or whatever it might be. I do agree with you. I've had the same experience of that. I think of it like a whole. It really did for me translate to a visceral feeling in my body, kind of an absence of is the best way I would describe what that feeling reflected. And what I'm kind of getting to is what was absent, and what is absent for so many of us that is created in our childhood environments is our more whole definition of ourself, or who we are. That undefinable for many of us kind of essence, uniqueness, right? That thing that makes me tick a little differently than everyone else. That's really the most simple way we can define what a self is. Though back early on in our childhood, based on what relationships were present to us or were not present to us, based on what our environments looked like or didn't, the safety and security of that space to begin to express who we are as a different being from even those around us. When we didn't have that safety and security, we, as all humans will do in beginning in childhood, will adapt. We're incredibly adaptive creatures. So because in that childhood, again, state of dependency, we are the one creature that we're born in an immature state, meaning a human infant can't continue life on its own outside of a relationship. So within these earlier relationships really becomes how we begin to define, well, I should say first, how we begin to understand and then define ourselves, or who we think we are. So saying that to say, so many of us begin to adapt, and we, like many, become, or myself, like many listeners and many of your Bettys, become an overachievement, right? A driven person to define our identity based on these accomplishments or accolades. For me, that began in an emotionally unattuned childhood where I didn't have caregivers who were able to feel and process their own emotions. So they weren't able to create that safety and security to help me explore Mayan. And our emotions is a big part of what makes each of us us. So to adapt and to maintain my connection to my mom in particular, who was my primary caregiver, she was the one physically present throughout my days, caring for me, tending to my needs in childhood. I began that process of modification. So I began to know myself only through the achievements that for me was through academic-based achievements. Not surprising to hear that, decades later, I was achieving a PhD level of accomplishment. I understood myself through that value. So flash forward now in time and to kind of map it on, while each of our childhoods look different, we've adapted though in similar ways, just going with this overachiever personality, right? Who I know myself to be and the value I have in my relationships is because of how I'm performing. Right now, if in my relationships, I'm not performing, I'm not able to find or maintain these bonds, and or I want to have children, right? And I'm not able to now do these things. Now what's being challenged? Who I've come to know myself to be. If I'm now stepping out of, right, that validation I used to get from all of these endless accomplishments, I mean, that's what I think was me describing that hole. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to show up for myself if I wasn't achieving something or serving another being. And again, for me, as all of us, all of these adaptations are ways that we've had to maintain safety and security in our earliest relationships. And that is why we can become very successful and adapted in many areas, yet continue to struggle in our relationships.